day in and day out we did that, and the more drunk we became, the more fun we had. So it was a case of we lived life to the extreme.
Frederick Seaman, John Lennon's final personal assistant and confidant, remembers him as a withdrawn, tormented soul who longed for the freedom and creativity of his past.
Those were some of John's fondest memories, because to John, the early Beatles, the Cavern Club, and even before that, the various visits to Hamburg, that to John was the highlight of his life. Because, in fact, he once told me that the feelings that he experienced in 1980 when he was working on Double Fantasy were similar to the feelings that he experienced in 1960-61 when he was working in Hamburg, and when he knew that he was going to make it big. And he was sort of intoxicated with that feeling and that knowledge. He felt very strong. He felt great all the time. And he savored that feeling in 1960 and 61, and he savored it in 1980. But the Cavern Club certainly was a stepping stone to the mass success that he achieved in 1963-64. And those gigs that they played at the Cavern Club were certainly some of the greatest gigs that the Beatles did, because by the time the Beatles achieved mass fame and they were touring the world, well, as a live band, they were basically useless, because John knew that by that time, by the time Beatlemania hit and the fans were screaming, it didn't matter how good they were, it didn't matter what they played, it didn't even matter if they played. They could have been up there lip-syncing and the fans would have gotten hysterical anyway, because the whole point was mass hysteria. Beatlemania had nothing to do with the music. The music was incidental. It was just an excuse for masses of teenagers to go crazy and have orgasms. And John was very aware of that, and he was bitter about it and somewhat disappointed.
After the Beatles' swirling juggernaut touched down on American soil in 1964, a legion of tasteless copycats clamored to leap on board the bandwagon. From the very beginning, it was clear that here was something spirited and original, a prospect not particularly appealing to the parental generation of squares that oversaw this shaggy British invasion. John Lennon commented that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. He handed grown-ups everywhere the ammunition they thought they needed to resurrect their crumbling world of mindless conformity. This was a force, however, that could not be checked. Here, Beatles manager Brian Epstein meets the press to diffuse the controversy.
Spoken to many of the promoters this morning, and when I leave here I have a meeting with several of the promoters who are not anxious that any of the concerts should be cancelled at all. Actually, if any of the promoters were so concerned, and it was their wish that a concert should be cancelled, I wouldn't in fact stand in their way. As a matter of fact, the Memphis concert, which is nearest to the place where this broke out, apparently sold more tickets yesterday than they had done up until that date.
As the Beatles' music developed, so did their desire for a deeper understanding of the extraordinary lives they were living. They were hothouse grown, Lennon once commented. Like mushrooms, we had 30-year-old heads and 20-year-old bodies. Initially, they sought insight from various psychedelics, but soon realized that they afforded only a glimpse of a possibility, and rejected them in favor of disciplined meditation as taught by His Holiness the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Ironically, it was George's beautiful wife, Patty, who first introduced the Beatles to the teachings of the diminutive guru. We were all looking for something, she has said, and when a girlfriend told me about the Maharishi coming to London for a series of lectures, I was determined to go. George, meanwhile, alerted the other Beatles that they could hear him speak at the Hilton on August 24th. Afterwards, the Maharishi met the boys and invited them to a 10-day conference in Bangor, North Wales the next day. Traveling with the teacher by train were Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, and Patty's younger sister, Jenny Boyd, among others. George especially was genuinely excited about the prospect of finally hooking up with someone who might be able to provide some answers to the Beatles' non-stop, topsy-turvy existence. Naturally, the platform at Bangor was mobbed by hundreds of screaming fans. John later confided that the master actually thought the crowds had turned out to see him. Their Christian backgrounds notwithstanding, Harrison and Lennon especially took to the Hindu-based teachings of the Maharishi and immersed themselves in the quiet bliss of his meditational technique. And so the Beatles joined His Holiness at his extravagant ashram in Rishikesh, India, at the foothills of the Himalayas for a proposed 3-month course of study. Ringo and his wife Maureen left after only 10 days, while Paul and his girlfriend Jane Asher managed to stick it out for a full 6 weeks. John and George, however, were determined to finish the teacher's training course, but were ultimately convinced by Beatle cohort magic Alex Mardas that the Maharishi was something less than fully enlightened after he allegedly made a play for the earthly affections of fellow meditator Mia Farrow, something I for one believe to be totally without foundation. On Christmas Eve 1993, I spoke with the Maharishi by transatlantic telephone at his world headquarters in rural Sweden.
You have special affection for George Harrison. He's meant a lot to a lot of people for many years now. How do you see that? How do you see Mr. Harrison?
I see him as a successful musician in his own talent. Whatever the effect, but he has become popular. And I attribute this to his talent also and to the British press intelligence. British press is very intelligent to promote their values, their national values.
But Mr. Harrison has been very intelligent because he's used rock and roll music and popular music to promote the tenets and philosophy of transcendental meditation and spirituality. Surely you must applaud him for that, for properly using the medium of music to help to enlighten the world.
I was happy when he started to meditate. I knew he would make a big impression in the world since he started to meditate. That's how the talents grow with this program. And all the world of science and the world of artists and all the different values. But it has taken, the whole society has taken a good turn in this knowledge. Very good. And now the whole politics is going to be sanctified with it.
In the spring of 1968, Lennon and McCartney met the press in New York to formally reject the holy leader.
We made a mistake.
And we thought, what? We're human, you know. That's all, you know.
Interestingly, many years later, McCartney seemed to reverse his position somewhat during a 1990 press conference. Asked about his concert performance of Fool on the Hill, he had this to say.
You know, Fool on the Hill to me is like anyone who's not listened to. Originally it was kind of like a guru figure from